Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And I have the most fascinating, inspiring guest with me today. Her name is Sylvia Worsham. She is an international and multilingual speaker and turning points coach who specializes in empowerment, sales, and leadership. She is the author of the book titled Journey to Me, Trust the Wisdom of Change, which helps her readers propel themselves into a life of love, compassion, and joy. And we can all use a little bit more of that. Sylvia has her own powerful story of transformation when a life-altering event prompted her to leave corporate America to become an entrepreneur. And she's going to tell us all about that. Sylvia, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about this conversation.
Oh, I am too, but okay, so I'm starting to get chills again already.
Me too.
And it's not post hot flash. Your story is just so fascinating, and just what an honor not only to meet you and to talk to you, but what an honor to know that you're still on this side of the earth with us, because you had an incredible life-threatening event.
Yes, I did.
Tell
Yes, I
us.
did. And it's quite scary for women listening in the podcast, because this is something that most of us would never think could happen, from taking a little itty bitty birth control pill after the age of 35.
Oh my
And
goodness.
that's why I had that life-altering event. But I had taken it, safely for 10 years in my first marriage with no issues whatsoever. And what I think is the irony of it, you mentioned corporate America. I worked for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. So I worked for the corporate giant Pfizer. And my job was to sell pharmaceuticals. And often in my job, I would talk about side effects, and those are the lovely effects that can happen when you take a medication. And I became the itty bitty statistic that birth control pills have on their labeling of, well, pulmonary embolisms can occur after the age of 35, blah, 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 blah. I was 37. I was dating my second husband, and I had a little boy at the time. He was like 6 years old. And my husband was like, well, my boyfriend said, hey, let's go to Louisiana for Easter. And I want your son to meet my family. For a single mom, that's a huge happening. That doesn't happen very often. And so I wanted to be on that trip. The problem was that like 2 days before we were scheduled to fly out, I started getting this pain right below my right breast, like above the rib cage. And it just kind of felt like something was stuck in there. You know how air gets stuck?
Yeah.
And it would just come and go. And it was a little painful, and I couldn't really take deeper breaths. And it was just weird. And so I'm blessed that I come from a medical family, and I can just pick up the phone and call any of my siblings and ask, hey, what's this? And so my brother, in all fairness to him, never saw me clinically. So it was all over the phone. And he said, well, you're exercising 7 days a week. You're in super good health. I think it's pleurisy. And for those that are listening and you don't know what pleurisy is, it's the inflammation of the lining of the lung, and it mimics pulmonary embolisms. I mean, to a T. So I'm thinking, okay, I have this painful thing. And he said, it's going to be painful. So just take this thing over the counter for 5 days and, prepare yourself. It's going to be hardcore. And so I took a flight against my mother's wishes with my little boy. And I remember landing and not being able to kind of, how you reach down to get your belongings. I couldn't even do that without it just feeling like pressure in my chest. It was just horrible. And so luckily we spent the night at a hotel. And at 3 a.m., this horrible pain jolts me out of bed. And I could hear my little boy's breathing. So I'm still in the now, nowhere else. And I hear a prompting, super persistent prompting of lean forward and you'll be able to breathe. And I'm just like, I'm going to listen to this. So I'm going to lean forward, and I'm able to take deeper breaths. And I don't realize that in that moment, 2 blood clots are going through my heart, large, and they end up in my left lung. And that was explained to me the next day at the ER. But so miracle 1 is listening to the prompting from the To me, it's the Holy Spirit. Some people, it could be the higher source, energy. But
Mhm.
for me, it's God talking to me, hey, do this, because this is what's happening. So the next day we rush to St. Luke's Episcopal Hospital. I'm in Houston, Texas, because we had flown from South Texas to Houston. So I'm in the biggest medical center in Texas, which is great because they're fully equipped to handle this situation. And they do a scan, and I get a pulmonologist walk into my room and say, you're really lucky to be alive. I'm even surprised you survived the night, let alone like you have two large ones in your left lung, but you've got like, it's everywhere. You've got pulmonary embolisms everywhere. And it's I was terrified. And my little boy's outside with my boyfriend. They had only met twice before. So it was like, single mom, like, let me be warrior, like, let me just stand up from the pain and find a landline because I'm in the ER and my cell phone doesn't work. And how do I get a hold of my mom, or who can pick this kid up, And so all these things. So I put my pain aside and I'm doing all these crazy things. And I finally, my mom is able to fly up, and my sister-in-law, grateful for her, she takes my son back. And so now it's my mom and my boyfriend and me. And the very next day, they take another scan because in the original scan, they found that my liver was inflamed and they don't know why. And I'm already thinking, coming from a medical family, coming from the healthcare environment that I'm working in, it sounds like a tumor to me. Like, why would an organ be inflamed like that?
Right.
Something's blocking it. And that's when I get 6 doctors in my room and I'm just laying there. And the specialist says, well, we've already discussed, everybody's on board. We're going to do something that's totally different because this is such a different case. We've never seen your case before. You have this blood clot and it's blocking the main vein that supplies blood to all your main organs. And your liver it's about to block the blood supply to your liver, and you're going to go into full hepatic failure. And you're going to require a transplant. And so I'm sitting there, 37 years old, having met the love of my life, and just kind of staring blankly at these doctors that won't even look at me in the face. Because they're just like, they're not confident I'm going to survive the night. In fact, my mother, when she stepped out to call my dad, overheard the specialist scream to the ICU director, if you don't get me a bet stat, this girl is going to die on us. So my mom's like, okay. And so they explain, we're going to give you this medication and it's going to do all these things to you. And when they get to death and hemorrhagic stroke, my mind just kind of goes blank. And I surrender to God and to my fate and whatever's coming next. And so I surrender and accept, which are huge steps in this journey of life. We always have to kind of go through that. And the very next day, I have a woman with the Catholic diocese that kind of walks into my room and she says, do you want to pray with me? And at this point, we don't know if the therapy's worked or not. So I need a miracle, a very big miracle to get me past Easter Sunday morning, because this is now Easter Sunday morning. And we start praying. My boyfriend's in the room with me. We form a circle. And in the part of Our Father, thy will be done, this love, I mean, huge love envelops the whole room. And I feel like I'm being cradled like a baby in his arms. And it's the most powerful moment of my life. I've never felt a love like this. It's really hard to put into words. I tried to do it in Journey to Me, and I couldn't do it justice. And
did you know at that moment that everything was going to be okay?
Oh yeah.
Or
he let me know. He let me know in that moment. And I had this understanding of like, I'm okay, because he's here and he's confirming it. And when she leaves, Donnie turns to me and says, you felt them too, didn't you? And I was just like, yes. I couldn't even form the yes word. I was like, had tears streaming down my face. And I had gone from a moment of sheer terror before he visits the ICU, which is the second miracle I received, the miracle of a love unlike any love here on earth. And a knowing, that peaceful knowing of like, you're fine. Not only was I fine, but like 20 minutes later, the doctors came back and they were totally shocked that I had no long-term complications. There was no scarring in my lungs, which for a case like mine should have left. They were huge. They should have left big holes in my lungs. There was nothing. And they were like, how does that happen? And I thought to myself, it's gone. That's how that happens. And it just wakes you up. You can't go back to your old life of being a perfectionist, controlling achiever, achieving to be happy when you've gone through a transformative spiritual moment like this. It suddenly just wakes you up and you start going through a different process, a different shift, an inner shift, if you will, because now everything's called into question. Now I'm like, what is my purpose in life? I mean, why did I survive this? Some people have one pulmonary embolism and they die. I had multiple, and then this thing that just nearly took me, because the doctors had explained to my parents that I had a 20% chance of surviving. And I'm 37 and I'm like, I have a little boy. I mean, all these things are just like incredulous.
Right.
But the gift of receiving these miracles, it's such a huge, joyful moment. It was the greatest blessing I ever received in my life, in all honesty. Nearly dying. Who can actually say that with a straight face and full of joy? I mean,
that's a
thank
really
God
good
for
point.
that.
Yeah. Yep, that's a really good point. I'm so blown away by all of this because, as a medical professional myself with 40 years experience in the field, I mean, I've seen some amazing things happen, but this is truly a miracle that you survived that, not only survived, that it was such a quick turnaround. And, I'm sure that absolutely floored your team, your medical team, because I know they have never seen anything like that before.
No, and it really does, because the medical field, they're science-based, as you know, and faith-based doesn't really come into the equation. Although people, medical doctors who have faced similar things end up surrendering to their faith. Because when you are in a situation where you can no longer control your circumstances and you are now at the whim of whatever is out there, that's what leads you to that surrender piece. It's hard to do. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do because you're surrendering your control and you're stepping into uncertainty with faith that it is happening in your favor. That's a hard pill to swallow for some people, but it is the most freeing moment. Truly, it's the value of surrender.
I really love that, the surrender and acceptance. And, we even talk about that in our martial art, when an attack is coming, you just accept, surrender to it, and then you react. You don't resist it. You don't try and fight it, because when you do that, it actually turns against you. But when you surrender and accept, then you have the ability to move through it. So I guess the same thing does happen with a life event like that. And like you said, it's very, very difficult. And I know you're a coach. Do you teach people not only the value of doing that, but the steps of how to go about it? Because especially for someone like me, who is a control freak, if you look up control freak in the dictionary, you will see my face. It's really a hard concept to wrap your head around because you want to just fight everything.
Yes, I actually do teach people on it. And the book actually carries a blueprint with it on how to take a turning point with whatever it is for you. It could be as small as losing the promotion you thought you had in the bag. And it devastates people a lot, because if they put all of their happiness into that event and then it doesn't pan out, where does that leave them? So as a coach, what I did in Journey to Me was I talked a lot about how your subconscious programming comes into play. And those are patterns of behavior, which you mentioned one of them. A lot of people call them security seekers, certainty seekers. We're all, our society kind of teaches us, you need to have control over this, or, you won't be happy in life. Well, that's a pattern of behavior, and it's a pattern of self-sabotage. And it's just not the greatest thing for you when you're navigating these major turning points in life, because these are opportunities for you to shift your lens into something better. something better for you.
I'm so happy you mentioned that, because it's great to have goals, but when you focus so much on the goal, you're not really paying attention to the journey and the process of where you're trying to get. And I think that's where the self-sabotage really comes into play. You're tripping your own self.
Yes. And you're not having fun along the journey, which is what most of us forget. I had totally forgotten that fun piece. I was just so focused in corporate America, which most people who have ever worked in corporate America can attest. It's never enough. The more you give, the more they want. And because it's all about, the bottom line is about the sales and the money and the status. And it's go, 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 go. It's the American society. I actually kind of gave an overview of this in chapter 4, because I took everybody to France in chapter 4, and I kind of gave a contrasting view of life and culture, the European culture versus the American culture, and they're totally different animals. And that's why they at first don't understand each other. But if you were to take the good pieces of each, that would be like the journey of life, like the balancing act of life, which there's nothing wrong with having goals. It's when the balance kind of tips too much to one side. It's one of those things. And I know martial arts talks a lot about balance and inner balancing. I mean, all cultures talk about it. You got the chakras that talk about it. It's like, if something's off balance, then you're not. It's the same thing with our minds. Our minds sometimes can solely operate from fear-based ego, what I call the fear-based ego identity. Ego is not the enemy. But when your self-image is made up of fear-based feelings and limiting beliefs, that's where you run into a lot of problems. And some of these turning points turn into a stuck mode, for you, because you can't see beyond that fear. And you miss out on those pockets of joy in the journey. And there's so many.
Fear can be incredibly paralyzing. It's really, fear has its role and can be really good when it keeps you safe. You're okay. I didn't see that bus coming. Whoops, I better step back on the curb. That's good fear, but fear can be so paralyzing, and it's almost like it takes over, and it runs that circuit of, I can't do this, I can't do this, until you really believe that you can't do whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Not only that, you can't do anything.
And that's really where, as coaches, and we both know, affirmations, when you talk to yourself, instead of listening to those thoughts, because those thoughts are based from your inner belief system. And if your inner belief system is limiting your amazing capacity as a human being, that's why we call them limiting beliefs, then you are that's a self-sabotage in itself, right? So we interrupt the thought and we replace it with an affirmation. And some people feel funny doing it. I know I did when I first started. I thought it was mumbo jumbo, and because I didn't believe that, I mean, come on, look at my background. I come from a medical family. It's all science-based, all these things. And their modeling gets passed on to me, right? Their belief system, my subconscious mind thinks it's normal and natural for me to believe this stuff, right? So realize that, guys, when you're operating from that space. And one of the first activities I remember doing in my personal growth journey from this traumatic experience was to look at my family tree. I looked at my dad's side of the family, I looked at my mom's side of the family, and I made 2 lists. I said, what were their fears that they passed on to me that I can see right now in my life, acting out, reenacting it, and the loving parts of what they modeled to me from each side. And you can see it when you interact with your family. There's things about your family you can't stand. Well, then take a good look at yourself. Are you doing the same thing with your children, with your spouse? The things that you never liked, you may be doing them. I know I caught myself. I'll give you an example. In chapter 1, I discussed how my dad's fear turned into anger a lot of times. Like his fear of losing us, right, will turn into anger. And so sometimes when my kids do something that is terrifying, downright terrifying to me, they are doing these horrible stunts, my fear creeps up And instead of being compassionate and loving, I sometimes turn angry and I'll get mad at them if they get hurt. I mean, how backwards is that? But that comes from the modeling and your mind thinking it's normal. It's a normal response. And my second husband was like, that's not normal. So like, let's try to figure out where that comes from. And that comes from my dad, or my mom, her lack of self-love. She was a very caring person. Ours is a Mexican culture. So the women tend to be very, I hate to say it, but people pleasers. They're always servicing everybody else and they kind of leave themselves last. Well, that's lack of self-love. And I didn't know for a long time where that came from until I started to just observe. I mean, I just stopped talking and I looked and I was like, there it is. That's where that comes from. And so I made those lists, but then I also made it on the balance side of things, the loving things that they passed on me that I want to continue. So,
and do you share that with your clients and teach them how to do that for themselves as well?
Yes, because, I'm essentially coaching myself out of a job. I don't want them to rely on me for their answers, because the answers, guys, are inside of you. All of them are inside of you. We always seek answers on the outside of ourselves. I know I was guilty of that for many years. And now I turn inward and I ask myself the hard questions, the reflective questions. And usually within a day, 2-3 days, the answer is staring right at me. And I get it and I move on from where I feel like I'm stuck in. So do I coach people on how to do that? Yes, because I want them to be happy. I don't want them to take the long detour I took to joy. I was stubborn and I thought, and I'm saying that very specifically, I thought that I was living my life the way I needed to live it and not God's way of living my life and submitting to his ways, that was a big lesson for me. That one was huge because submission, coming from a Mexican culture and background, that was like a dirty word for me. I just did not understand the concept. But like surrender, submission is the most freeing gift you can give yourself.
I like to say it's kind of like that proverbial 2x4 across the head.
Yes.
Like when you're not really paying attention to yourself or to what God's plan is for you, and it's the signs are there, the signs are there, the signs are there. You just keep ignoring them. And finally, he just kind of smacks you over the head with the 2x4. And it's like, oh, okay, I get it now. I'll pay attention. I got it. And that's a reminder.
That was in chapter 4. It was a nice little reminder because it was years after the surrender and acceptance piece. But and I'll share this with you. In my experience, it's best to surrender and accept first, that being the very first step. And submission is easier once you surrender and accept, because for whatever reason, for me, it worked out that way. The first time around, submitting to his ways was like what you just described. I wanted to quit halfway through it because I thought, why am I doing it? Why am I doing this first? And he said, because you're emotionally ready to do that. I've equipped you. You're ready. A lot of these turning points teach us lessons that when we reflect back and we look at our life, we see it like clearly what we learned and why we learned what we learned because of what was coming down our path. And that's why that grand master plan that we all have is residing within us. It's there. It's our soul identity. We've always had it. It just has been like covered up by all the modeling, all the programming, all the fears that society puts on us, that are subliminal messages we're receiving every single day. So that's why it's really important, guys, to make sure that you don't always tune into social media, that you turn that off, that there's moments that you reflect inward, that you have a date with yourself once a week to get to know yourself, to know, especially after a big turning point, you've been through divorce and you don't know who you are. Yeah, those are the times where you really have to kind of turn inward and start to reconnect with yourself and understand.
I want to say a little bit more about that because, of what you were saying, our brain does not, and I think it's really important for the audience to hear this, that our brain takes in the messages that it hears. It records it like a computer. It does not know what is reality, what is true, and what isn't. So even those negative messages that you might be getting from society, from other people, even the messages that you tell yourself, your brain is recording that, and it just spits it back out like a computer, like you're typing in the URL that you always use, and you just have to do one letter and boom, you get to the site that you're going to. It's the same thing happens with our brain. So it's so important and so valuable what you're saying, that I really just kind of wanted to take a highlighter across that. So the listeners really take that to heart. And, I love how you said how difficult it was for you to embrace that. Coming from that medical background, science-based background. I'll never forget the first time I went to an acupuncturist. And I was still working as a respiratory therapist in critical care, intensive care, all that kind of stuff. And I even still had my medical scrubs on when I walked into this guy's office. And I was like, number one, I can't believe I'm going to an acupuncturist. And number two, I hope that nobody sees me, because it was on a main road. And I wanted so badly to stop somewhere and get a disguise so nobody would see my red hair and my bright green scrubs that says, oh my God, look at what she's doing.
You know what? But that's awesome that you did that. I did go to an acupuncturist for my stress and my hormone related issues that I started to have, because I can't take hormone replacement therapies. So I got to go, that's a big no-no for someone like me. That would be bad. So I started to go to an acupuncturist too. And I'm terrified of needles. So that was an interesting journey.
That's a big step. Yeah, that's a really big step.
But the more important thing was meditation for me. That's what really stopped a lot of this inner dialogue, angry dialogue I was having. And writing the book really was very therapeutic for me. So a lot of the technique I coach on is journaling. If writing is something that you love to do, journal, just to declutter your mind so that those answers are readily available for you to hear them. Because if you're go, social media and all these other things that are just bombarding your brain, you're not gonna be able to hear that intuition that is just dying to show you the way. Your soul is trying to show you, this is your path. This is the easier path. Take this path instead of this other path that is harder, if you will, where fear resides. It's going to make it easier.
Turning off the noise is so important, even just for a little while.
5 minutes. I mean, not even. You don't need, if 5 minutes is too much for you, heck, start with 30 seconds. I don't care, as long as you build the habit. Now realize, some people talk about 21 days building a habit. I tend to disagree with them. I'd go 45 days if I were you, and building a habit. And because by that point, you've created the identity of the person who gets up and for a minute or 2 or 3 or whatever is your comfort zone, you quiet your mind. That means you turn off everything, and you could take a walk in, a very brisk walk in nature. You just be in nature and just not look at anything and just be in the present moment. That's what it requires. For me, it meant meditation, but there's so much you can do to change the programming in your mind to the person that you desire to be. There's so many ways to do it, really. And in Journey to Me, I do go over a great deal of those different options that you have, and I give you journaling questions to just maybe reflect on.
I love the way that you said, go out into nature, because I'm one of these people who can't meditate. I have ants in my pants. And so I just can't sit still and, empty my, or, clear my mind. It ends up getting worse. I start making my grocery list or, my menu for the week. So, or did I send that email? So what I do is I just go outside. If I could go outside and just get away from the computer, get away from the noise, anything else, and just go in my backyard for 10 minutes, I can't believe the difference that it makes. One of these days, I'm going to have to take my blood pressure before and after and my heart rate, but I could just feel, it's like, I just kind of calm down.
And we all need it, because we all have a very big role to play in this world. And we have these amazing gifts that need to come out. Wherever you're at in your journey,
Mhm.
you know what those gifts are. Believe me when I tell you, I knew from the moment I was a little kid, I was a writer, but I put it off because I was a perfectionist and I was afraid of failure. And I thought, well, what if nobody reads it? What if, the what ifs kept me in this constant state of like, I call it the hamster wheel. I just kept seeing the same stuff happen over and over and over again. It's because my programming was the GPS. And until I interrupted that, and I started to incorporate some of these methods we've discussed, the other method that I think most people don't think about, is really interesting because you mentioned it earlier, how it has no filter, your subconscious programming. Well, it doesn't know what's real and what's not. So why don't you use the power of your imagination to give it some new programming? And so what that looks like, guys, is you close your eyes and you kind of view yourself on a big screen, and you play out what it is that you want, the outcomes that you're searching for. So I would get very, very clear in what I want in my relationships, in my health, in my mindset, in my career. And I would pick one in each. And, every week, just imagine and just keep imagining. In my case, I imagined signing, autographing my book. And I just kept imagining it over and over and over again. And your mind knows no difference. It does not know it's not real. Only you know that. So, and you can talk yourself through it. And when those thoughts come up that, no, I can't do it, or I'm afraid of this, or I'm afraid of that, or what if, you can talk to yourself. You can affirm and just say, I am. The power of I am is so powerful. And yes, it feels silly. Yes, yes, yes. I will agree with you. It feels silly, but the more you do it, the less silly it feels. And the more your body starts to take ownership and take on that identity of the person that you desire to be.
Never underestimate the power of the imagination and the power of visualization. And it does work.
It works a lot.
A lot. It's very highly effective, and you can do it anywhere, anytime, as long as you're not driving.
Yes, please don't drive.
Right. So a couple of other questions I had for you, because I'm really curious about this, knowing your background, especially, with your corporate job, and then going through this incredible life-altering event. And thank goodness it came out the way it did. I'm very grateful that it did for you and your family. When you went back to work, did you quit your job immediately? And when you said, hey, I quit, what was their reaction?
I did not quit immediately because, as all of us know, you can have a life-altering event, but if you are not aware of your programming and how it operates in your mind, you have no idea why you react the way you do. It did kind of change me in the sense that I started to take personal development courses and masterminds, and I started to learn more about the mind. And it wasn't until 2017 when I became a coach with the John Maxwell team that a lot of these beliefs surfaced as to why I did what I did. So I went, maybe that happened in 2012. Then my boyfriend asked me to marry him, and I continued at Pfizer until Pfizer no longer could not transfer me to Austin, Texas. So I ended up, old programming medical device job, which was even more stressful than the first one. And within a year, I did resign after I lost my baby in a miscarriage.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right, because then Vivian made her grand entrance within like, oh my gosh, like no time at all. So there's always a blessing as you go through rough times, but it makes you realize like the transition. Now, this is where patience and his timing really came into play. For someone like me who loved to control her circumstances, who had tied her significance and worth to a paycheck, to retire from that world and transition into a stay-at-home role, that transition was tough. Like I can say, for women listening, I can understand when you don't feel that fulfillment right away because the programming is so off. But in those years, after I kind of look back, I noticed he was just chiseling away the elements that did not fit the role he needed me to step into, the true soul identity of an author and a speaker and a coach. I needed to learn like this process, and I needed to learn that my significance and my worth are not tied to anything outside of me, that exists within me. And that was a hard transition to go through. So it was from 2012 until 17 that I became an entrepreneur. So there's like 3 years in there, and there's a lot of ego identity like playing a huge role there, you know, kind of pulling me in different directions. But I knew there was something more to my life. But I did deal with some survivor's guilt. I felt very guilty surviving when others died, but that was my fear-based ego playing into it. You know, and that's why it's so important for people to do this personal growth in their life, to take a couple of courses, listen to a couple of podcasts, really understand how your mind works, so that if you start journeying and you encounter these major turning points, you use them as a true turning point to shift and turn the lens of your life into it happening for you and not to you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it was beautifully said. And the one thing I know I got this out of your, either your bio. I stalk my guests on
That's
social
all right. You
media.
can stalk me. It's all right.
Yeah, I do. You know, because I really want to get a feel for them and their experiences and their personality before I have you on the show. So, but I don't know if I got this from your website or your LinkedIn profile or your Podmatch profile, but it just really resonated with me, from trauma to transformation. And that is just such an important thing to realize, that for anybody out there who's listening to this, and if you are going through a really rough time, there is a way to turn it around, and you can have the life that you want and the life that you love. And it all starts with some of the things that Sylvia's been talking about. Just, you know, it's possible. Everybody can have
Baby
it.
steps, though. It's baby steps. It's not these big leaps, you know, because then you miss the lessons learned. And those are so important because they're there for a reason. And as hard as they are to learn, there is so much joy when you do learn the lesson and you can step up on a different step foundationally from where you started. I always tell my coaching clients, like, look back from the moment you started working with me to the point you are now, whether it be 4 months in, 5 months, I want you to pat yourself on the back, because this isn't, when you start any change in your life, realize that your subconscious mind is going to rebel, because it's different from what you've given it for the last 40 years or however old you are. I'm turning 48 in a couple of days. So now you know how old I am.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
And I have to tell you, okay, 50 is not far away from 48, and magic happens when you turn 50.
I love it. I actually like
magic.
my process, and I appreciate my wrinkles, for they tell a very big story, and my scars. And I always show my scars to my kids. And I was like, this was a joyful scar because you came out of that scar, you know, and all these different things. I'm so grateful for all of the things I've learned since that turning point. And, you know, there came a point when the pandemic hit Austin in Texas in early March. That prompting got so strong about writing my book. And I was so afraid. But then I kept hearing, it's not your story to keep. It's, you got to help others find this joy, because you know how to do it. You can share the blueprint, and you can help others go through it with more joy. Because that's the thing. Like, when I went through it, there was so much pain and fear. You know, I remember my husband like reading my chapters and saying, man, you're really comfortable with your pain and fear. I mean, you write about it so well, but when it comes to joy and happiness, I struggled with that. I just could not put it into the same level of passion, you know, that he wanted me to put it in. I was like, but I feel happy marrying you, I promise. And he's like, because he was reading the chapter I was marrying him. And he's like,
oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
But the intensity is not there. And I'm like, but that's how fear is, doesn't it? I mean, fear can really, like, you can really feel it and stay stuck in it. And love is is as powerful, if not more powerful than fear.
Right.
It's just that we don't really
That's
practice it as much.
that's so funny. I want to get back to what you said about, the scars and showing the scars, because there's I can't remember who the songwriter is, but there is a beautiful song, and it is, I'm grateful for the scars.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just, it's a beautiful song. I just absolutely love it. And it's like, we're all covered with them, either they're physical that we can see them, and some of them you can't see. And those are just as important, and we're just as painful to get.
And every wrinkle on our face
Oh yeah.
tells a story,
Yeah.
and I used to like, oh my gosh, the perfectionist in me, and I'm a recovering perfectionist because, it comes and goes as it pleases. But even when my grays start to show, my hair grows really fast. So I constantly have to color it, but in an effort to like kind of keep the cost down, I kind of can go for the 4 weeks. But there were times I would just hide. I wouldn't want to be seen on camera if my grays were showing. And it's been such a joyful difference now that I can be on video when my grays show at times, and I'm proud of them. Because I'm like,
good for
this
you.
wisdom that has come
Yeah.
from these moments in my life and these experiences, I'm so grateful for that wisdom, because it now gives me that beautiful contrast of, do I want to go back to that old life, that old identity that was so fear-based, that was so afraid to move and to be this person that I actually am? Or am I grateful for the identity I'm creating, this joyful identity that he needs me to step into so I can guide others to him? Because he lives in love and joy. He does not live in fear. That's not how he created us. He created us as these amazing, perfect beings. We're the ones that think we're imperfect and that we think we're, not enough. And all these ideas come from our modeling and our programming and anything else but him. And that's where the soul identity is so important to tap into it daily, just so that you can hear it.
If you're made in the image of God, how could you be wrong? How could it be bad?
Exactly. And who are you to question him? Right?
That's pretty arrogant, right?
That's pretty arrogant of us to question him and to say, well, I shouldn't write the book. When he's prompting you, write the book, it's time. Trust me. I mean, who am I to question him? And that's what I always remind people of, is that relationship. I mean, it shifted big time for me from the moment I surrendered to him and felt that love from him. I no longer believed in him, or just believed in him. Let me reframe that. I believed, and more importantly, trusted him with the reins of my life. That's a very different shift. And that's the shift that occurred during those years of being a stay-at-home parent and being chiseled, like removing these elements that just did not belong, to prepare me for the role I'm in now.
Okay, now that's a perfect segue. Speaking of parent, tell us just a little bit about your family.
Oh, my kids, they're the joys. So I have, my firstborn is a boy. He's 17 years old. So he's now a senior at McNeil High here in Austin, Texas. And he's been with me throughout the whole process here, because Vivian wasn't there.
He was there at the time all this was happening.
And he loves theater. He's my little actor, and he's very good at it. He does voices, which are amazing. I hope he goes into that. And so I've been kind of supportive in that role. And I have a 7-year-old daughter with my second husband, and she is the complete opposite of my boy. Very joyful, very much, those girls that kind of do their own thing, that don't really follow the rules, that initially are the ones that you're like, oh my gosh, as you're parenting them, you kind of need breaks, and tennis shoes and everything that goes along with that. But she's just such a joy, and she teaches me about curiosity, a lot about curiosity and staying curious and joyful and in the now. And my husband is, well, the love of my life. And he was there with me when God made his big presence known in the ICU, and stayed with me for 2 weeks, even though he had only been dating me for 4 months at the moment of impact, if you will.
Wow.
So
Oh, that's a keeper.
love. He's a
Yeah.
keeper. Yes. Despite, our 9 years of marriage, we've been married 9 years, and now we adopted a Maltese poodle last September. So that's the latest family member, and he's probably behind me somewhere on the stairs. Hopefully he's still there, not doing something he's not supposed to.
Well, you'll
But
find out.
I'll find out later because mommy was ignoring him while she did this podcast interview. So
Oh.
that's my family. I just love them to pieces. And that's why I do what I do. And I love what I do now. And I've so enjoyed being with you this morning. I love it.
Thank you. I have loved every bit of it too. So take just a few moments to tell the audience where they can find you, where they can find your book. You can give the links. All of that is going to be in the show notes, of course, but I really like to give my guests the opportunity to just share that information themselves.
Sure. Well, I'm Sylvia Worsham, and you can find me really anywhere. I'm available across the board except TikTok. I don't do TikTok, but I'm on Clubhouse, and I'm on LinkedIn is really my landing page right now, because I'm trying to change up my webpage to really reflect the nature of my business now and the direction of my business. I work a lot with entrepreneurs who are in their second act of life and who are going through a spiritual awakening, or because I've been there myself, I can guide you through that change in your life. And so I'm really everywhere. I've got a group called Journey to Me, which are for the readers of the book on Facebook. So find me, I'm there. And I am across the board on Instagram, Facebook, under Sylvia Worsham or Coach Sylvia Worsham, and you'll be able to find me there and link up with me. If you want an autographed copy of my book, you can email me and I'll leave it in the show notes, of course, so you can reach me on email and just say, I want your book, and I will gladly autograph it and send it to you. Otherwise, it's available online anywhere. Amazon is by far, it's on there. It's on Barnes and Noble. Any independent bookstore can order my book because I'm aligned with Ingram Sparks, and so they have contracts with everybody. So you can have the physical book any which way in any format you'd like. Okay. And so now we just got it translated. So eventually it'll be available in Spanish as well.
Awesome. Oh, that's wonderful. Because Spanish is your first language, isn't that correct?
Yes. Yes, it is.
That is
and my
awesome.
family was like, I really want to support you, but English is not my main language, and I really want it. And so that finally got finished up. And so we're now in the process of getting that put out via Amazon and just all that lovely work that goes into it.
Yes, I understand. Yeah. Well, congratulations on that. That's awesome. And just one final, if you can take all of this incredible conversation we've had. You've given us so much wonderful information and valuable tips and encouragement to make our transformations. Do you have one pearl of wisdom, one thing that you would encourage people when they're listening to this, that they help get them started on their path of transformation?
Really the one thing that's popping into my awareness is enjoy it. Enjoy the journey. Don't lose sight of the joy, that's the pockets of joy that are all around you as you journey. However big the storm is that you currently find yourself in, there are small pockets of joy around your journey and in your journey. And one big way to do this is to add gratitude into your daily routine. Be grateful and shift your mindset to that space, because that's where love and joy exists. When you thank your body for the beautiful thing it does for you, when you accept your body as it is, or if you're doing a physical transformation, if you're going through a health crisis like what I went through, be grateful for that event in your life and everything it's going to teach you. And just stay present, guys. Stay in the now. Stay in the now. Stop obsessing about your future and stop rehashing the past and stay in the present moment. That's
perfect.
My advice for you.
Absolutely beautiful. Sylvia, thank you so much for being on the show. I have just loved every minute of it. I think you're an amazing person, and I really appreciate you spending your time with us today.
And it's been my pleasure to be here to serve you and your listeners this morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, you are welcome. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it as always. And remember to look for the pockets of joy in your journey of life, to be grateful and to shift your mindset. And the last bit of advice is to be grateful for the scars. We all have them and we all learn from them. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.